Well, it's quite an unusual little gland that sits in the center of our forehead. And when I was doing the research for Eden, the Knowledge of Good and Evil, I came across some information when I was researching about Hermes. And I found it very interesting because in looking at the anatomical placement of this little gland in our head, there seemed to be something that just stood out to me that was like, why is this one little thing in our head, and most everything else in our head, we have two eyes, and we have, two ears, and we have two brain hemispheres, and all this kind of stuff, and why this little bitty gland that unfortunately was not a lot of information out there about it. And what I could find out about it was only things from a mystical, pagan genre. And I found that strange because once I started looking at what the pagans were saying about it, it made me stop and really want to know a little bit more about what is this little gland in our head really doing and what is it capable of. And so I had a person send me a cross-section of what it looks like if you take a brain and you cross-section it. And what you find is that there is this cross-section will look identical to the Ark of the Covenant. In other words, it looks like the two brain hemispheres form something that looks like the cherubim on either side of the mercy seat, and that the mercy seat, which was gold, right in the center, also looks like where the pineal gland fits inside of our brain. And according to a book that I was able to get my hands on that was written a long, long time ago, it's called the Book of Thoth, which was an Egyptian book. And it said, it kind of wanted to go into detail about the capability of the human brain. And we all know that the Egyptians were very pagan and that they were very much involved in mixing and doing some weird things, because we see the Sphinx had the head of a human on a lion's body. So they were very much into mixing, and that was something that God did not really ever want to happen, because he made all his creatures as one kind, good after their kind, and to really produce after their kind. So just knowing that the Egyptians had a little bit of understanding about the human body, and even the fact that archaeologically they found skulls that looked like that they had actually done some type of surgery on, it was a very interest to me to want to know what did they really know about the brain, and what was this little gland all about. And when I found out that this Book of Thoth had some things in it that talked about the capability of the brain, what I found out was that the book actually described these mysteries that were actually pertaining to certain areas of the brain that could be stimulated. And in stimulating those certain areas of the brain, it would expand human consciousness way beyond what was publicly actually thought to be capable of. And I had heard the word for years and years about opening the third eye, but I didn't really realize what it was talking about. I thought it's a mystical kind of thing, and you see, the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, and different people would make comments about, well, that's the third eye. Well, what I actually found out was a pineal gland in a lizard is a workable third eye. In other words, it allows them to be able to see in the dark. And so when I looked at this book that the Egyptians had supposedly had been a part of writing, it seemed that this pineal gland was what they were actually referring to as a third eye that existed in all humans. And so I went immediately into look at some research on the pineal gland as far as what does it really do? What function does it really have in the body? And the more that I would look at this and try to get my hands on information, it was almost like the medical establishment was not really giving a lot of indication as to what the pineal gland was actually able to do or what total function that it had. That in some books it would say, well, it's a hormone-producing gland and it regulates this or that. And in other books it would almost seem that they didn't even want to deal with it. In fact, in some of the biological and biology books that I was able to look through, it didn't even show the gland. It's almost like it was something that didn't matter, or either it was something that was being hidden.
So I'm kind of smelling a cover-up on this.
Well, that's kind of the way I took it, was because it seemed like all the pagans information was quite aware of what it was, the Eastern religions, but yet when you talked in the medical establishment, there was this like reservedness about even discussing it. And I think that really made me want to know more about it, because I'm one of those, I want to know the truth, and so what is the truth about this particular gland? And so what I found was these pineal hormones, according to the medical books, said that if you give that to a person, in other words, if we, for example, we can make estrogen and we can do like synthetic kinds of hormones. And what happened was when I guess they made these pineal gland hormones in a pill form, and if they gave them to people, it tended to make them have these vivid dreams, and that some people who took it would actually hallucinate, in which they thought they were in a heavenly or spiritual type realm where they were dealing with these beings that were grotesque and weird and all kinds of little things like horrific nightmare kinds of things. So I'm thinking, okay, this is quite interesting that something in our head would actually produce a weird sensation and cause you to come up with weird visions. God created us, and for some reason he put this in our head. What was it for? And the more I started looking at the fact that the pineal gland, as far as what I would call the Eastern religions that use like yoga and Kundalini, and who come from like Hinduism, and they sit in this what they call a cobra position, where they bend their legs up and they sit and they make a chant noise, or either they will form something that they call a mantra. In other words, it's a focal point, and either they will use that mantra to hum or make a sound. And what I found was when the body was in a harmonic resonance or in a certain sound environment, like in a chanting environment, that this particular gland would start vibrating, and that the vibration would actually cause the gland to spin a little bit and actually flicker, which made it look like a tongue of a serpent flickering. And I'm like, what in the world could be going on with this? Well, so I started looking at what did the Eastern religions, what was their goal? What was the reason they wanted to inflict this chanting to make this thing open up? And what I found out was that the more they did that, they said that they became illuminated and that they could channel spirits from another realm into their bodies. So because I had studied in my undergraduate work in psychology, was very interested in the brain and the function of the brain and spiritual realm and that kind of thing, this was really an eye-opening situation with me, because I'm thinking, okay, go back and look at Scripture, because what do we find in Scripture is very, very open to us, and it tells us that, like, for example, when King Saul wanted to consult Samuel, who had passed away, he went to the witch of Endor, and there she channeled Samuel. And the more that you understand, if you read the Bible, you find that it doesn't say that things like channeling and necromancy, witchcraft are not real. It tells us it is real, and because it's real, and because it opens up something to a spiritual realm, that you better not do it. Because, in fact, it goes on to tell us that if you do it, you do not have the capability to fight anything in that spiritual realm, and that you can be overcome by it. So when I saw that, I thought, okay, because I have been a Christian all my life, there have been times that I know that I've heard the voice of God speak to me in a very audible voice, in which I heard and knew, and I was in the home alone, and I knew at that moment when the words came, I could hear them just like you and I would be talking and hear someone. But it was very straight to the point and very clear and very much as to what he wanted me to do with my life, and I began to do exactly what he said, and I knew that it was just not something that I had thought up, because I would have never thought what I was told. And so I thought, well, you know, and all the work that I have done with schizophrenics, and when they would say to me, I hear these voices in my head, and in a schizophrenic situation, instead of them thinking they hear good things from a God that would maybe direct their paths and send them in the right direction, the voices they hear in their head are telling them very evil things. And to do these things that they do, it's going to cause them to be locked up or kill themselves or kill someone else.